Welcome everyone. My name is Jan Szczepanski from Jodocus, now part of Code. And welcome to the webinar today, or tonight, or this morning, wherever you are. We are going beyond Jira automation and explore the power of workflow automation. The power of automating your processes is hopefully obvious. You gain efficiency and accuracy, and you save your colleagues time and effort by automating repetitive parts of your processes, all while eliminating sources of error and ensuring compliance. But we still have Jira workflows, and the integrated automation builder has its limitations. So with a focus on Jira Cloud, we will explore the power of automation directly in your workflows, presenting use cases and discussing the pros and cons. With me today is Barbara from Decadis, and I'm going to bring her in, and we're going to have a little chat before we really get going.
Hi.
Hey, Barbara, how's it going?
Hi, it's going great. The weather's great. The day's nice. And I'm excited to talk about workflows today.
Awesome. Typical icebreaker question. Tell us where you're connecting from, and you already mentioned the weather is nice. So how is the weather?
Well, I'm connecting from Bonn, which is in the western Germany, where I'm sitting in my home office with a nice sunny day outside. So
that's perfect. I think we first met in Las Vegas this year. How long have you been a member of the Atlassian community, and did you enjoy Vegas?
Yes, I enjoyed Vegas, although it was very warm and very stressful. There was a lot going on, but I think I met lots of people. I learned a lot. I met lots of customers, interesting discussions all around on the event itself and all the events around it. So it was actually my first time at Team since I joined the Atlassian ecosystem nearly 3 years ago, and it was really an experience.
Was it a good time for you at Vegas for Decadis?
Yes. I think we had a lot of interesting discussions at our stand, a lot of customers coming by, new customers, old ones that wanted to chat with us because they're using our apps for ages. So we had a lot of interesting stuff going on there. Also a lot of interesting talk with people from Atlassian about where they are going with some of the tools they bring.
Yeah, awesome. Can you tell us a little bit about your role and focus at Decadis?
I actually started at Decadis in the consulting team, but I've switched over to the product management recently towards the end of last year. And there I'm actually the product owner for one of our other apps, not the one I'll be talking about today, the Admin Toolbox, which is a little admin helper app on Data Center. But today we'll be talking about Jira Workflow Toolbox, which is our biggest flagship app, the oldest of our apps. Yeah. And one I also know very well because I used it at a lot of our customers during my time as a consultant.
Okay, I've also seen it with probably the one of the best rated apps in the Atlassian marketplace. So I did a little bit of research today. So, but why did you decide to specialize in Jira workflows? What made you work?
I think, as you noted, it's one of the best rated apps on the marketplace. It's also one of the oldest apps on the marketplace. It was actually a thing before the marketplace was a thing, so more than 12 years ago. And back in the day, I think we just saw the potential of Jira as like a workflow engine, something to really customize to your processes, but also saw that the tools that were there natively provided by Atlassian, like the conditions validators, post functions that were available, were just not enough to really build your processes in Jira. So we went on to remedy that and put there what was missing to really make it a complete tool.
Yeah, cool. I mentioned in the intro, why is it so important to automate things? Obviously, there was like a really short version of it. What are your thoughts on that? Why? What are the benefits of automating stuff?
I think the most obvious benefit is, of course, if work is automated, you don't have to do it yourself. That's like the immediate, easy answer, that you have less work, less busy work to do, less repetitive stuff, and can focus on where actually your creative input is needed. But I think one of the aspects that many people underestimate is how good it is with keeping like consistency, because it just if your tasks are created automatically, or if some fields are filled automatically, it's much easier to ensure that these are according to form, where you have like specific requirements, or if you build some of your process restrictions for specific permissions or something into your workflows, it's much easier to build it in there and be sure that your processes comply with your requirements, even contexts, and that like having done automatically just reduces like the amount of errors that could be done there, and just ensures this consistent and compliance. And less errors, of course, is also less need to fix those errors, more happy customers if you're using it in the service management context, and just an underestimated aspect of automation.
Okay.
Do it correctly.
Yeah. Okay, so a few years ago, Atlassian introduced, or actually acquired a tool called Jira Automation, which is an IFTTT builder. So if this, then that, a rule builder to automate things, accessible to project administrators directly from Jira projects. What is the difference between Jira workflows and Jira automations?
I think the differences are the most obvious differences is that with Jira automation, you can have a bunch of different triggers. You can react to lots of different events that could happen in your Jira instance, whether it's like version changes or comments or triggers from outside, or issue creation. And for that aspect, it is very, very flexible. But on the other hand, that can also mean that you would want to like use it for everything, and then the list of Jira automations that you get can get very fast, very long, very fast. And for the triggers that you have, it's sometimes less precise than it could be, which we could see when looking at for example, the issue transition trigger. And it also is open for project admins, which is nice in a way, because then like everyone can more easily utilize it. But also this also means that anyone can go and build stuff right in your instance, and that also means that it's easy to lose the overview over your automations in your system. And especially if you are using Jira Standard in the cloud and have kind of strict fixed limits, no matter how big your instance is user-wise, that can easily become like an issue in that regard. And with automation and workflows, in contrast, your solutions are much more tailored, much more precise to where they apply, because they are more like built into your projects in a way, built into the configuration in the workflows, and that also makes them easier to share between different projects, because like create project with the shared configurations, right? You take all the schemes over, the workflows over, and then you also have all the configuration that you build into the workflows.
Cool.
That's of course kind of a issue of perspective maybe, but at least for me, the workflows are the place in Jira where like the process is represented. And then if you put some of the stuff representing your process in the workflow and some in the automation, you have them in two different areas, and then it's easy to lose track a little bit of both.
I think that's a good point to lay out for this webinar as well. So your Jira workflow are basically the foundation for building your business processes in Jira, right? And so when you, for example, start using process mining to find out what's wrong or what you could improve, you start analyzing the business processes, which are your Jira workflows. And so one thing you would then do is to add automations with either your app or with Jira Automation to really improve business processes when needed, right? And you mentioned a really important thing also, that when you are on standard, you have like really hard limits, right? So when you reach the limit, there is no further execution possible. And I've seen some instances with thousands of rules because as a Jira administrator, you can see everything. And so there are no dive charts, and they are wild. It's really wild to see that. So I think it's important when you introduce Jira Automation, which are great, just train your colleagues, make sure that they use some sort of a naming guideline, right? And so when is it better to use Jira Automation, and when is it better to use a workflow automation?
So at least from my perspective, Jira Automation is great for like small one-off stuff and stuff that is related to like specific event triggers, like triggers from comments, for example. But stuff that's really part of your workflow, like your process, I would put into the workflow, because then the workflow represents the process as a whole. And also that's less something about like workflow apps in general in comparison to Jira Automation, but specifically about Jira Workflow Toolbox in comparison to Jira Automation. For a lot of the stuff that you can do with Jira Automation, you can also do with Workflow, but we try to be even more flexible and even more powerful than Jira Automation can deliver. And we'll see some of those examples in the use case I brought today.
Okay. So when we will talk about, I mean, we don't want to finger point today, so let's talk a bit about the benefits of using Jira Automation, and maybe what are the cons as well.
I think the like one of the like benefits or like is that it's really easy to get into, also for project admins, right? But and you also have like the smart values to build your flexible stuff in there. But it's also like really helpful to maybe do review of the Jira automations on a regular basis, where they're like all the stuff that gets collected in there. If all your project admins go wild, as you said, some of the instances is still really needed. In a way, but that's like really for everything that has to do with specific triggers that are like not part of workflows, like stuff when, for example, you want to automate stuff around version management, right? Automate stuff when a version is created or when a version is released. There is something where Jira Automation can really shine, because it can shine outside the process of a single issue. This is something where Jira Automation has its strength.
Okay. So workflow automation is just for the workflow. So when you trigger something in the workflow, that's where you can automate stuff. Everything else, like all the other lifecycle events in your project, in your issue, that could trigger a Jira Automation, right?
Yeah, that could trigger Jira Automation.
All right.
And for workflows, one of the biggest thing that you can do there that you could not do with Jira Automation is that you cannot only like automate doing stuff, like automate actions that you have in your automation rules, because Jira Automation is always like reacting to something with this event-based system, but you can also build automated controls into your workflows, right? You have conditions and validators that you can put in your workflows and your processes to build controls. Say, okay, here we need specific fields to be set, or these steps can only be done by people from specific project roles or groups, stuff like that, which is much harder to put into an automation rule, because at the moment where the automation rule runs, the event has already happened, right? So this is like two aspects where each of the tools has strengths that the other just like, or has features that the other cannot and will not ever match.
All right. So I will bring your screen on because I think it would be good to jump right into the tool and show people around. because and I also have a technical question. We just discussed it. The difference between Jira workflow automation and let's say issue transition automation. So what is the difference, for example, between a post function and this issue transition automation rule? And second, what happens if something goes wrong? I know that there's an audit log within Jira Automation. Is there something similar in your app?
Yes, it's a very good question. So one could think that basically when you put a post function into a Jira transition, so basically a function that gets executed when that an issue goes through that transition, that would be kind of the same as building a rule on an issue transition trigger, right? But this is actually like one of the many small details where the tools differ, right? Because the Jira Automation issue transition trigger isn't actually that focused on when it's triggered. It just has like from status to status, and you could have multiple different ways to get around in your workflow. Multiple different transitions, and you cannot actually pinpoint which exact transition you're doing. So maybe, for example, you could have a point where you can go to done by rejecting an issue, and you could go to done by approving an issue. That could do very different, could result in very different actions, right? And this could be different transitions in your workflow. But here, the issue transition trigger would only see, okay, we go from in progress or something to done, and then you would have to like build filters in there, etc. pp. And with putting the automation in the transitions, you have it exactly what you need, where exactly you need it. So this is one of the small examples. And you mentioned that here, like every rule has an audit log, right? Where you see what happened to the rule. And we have something similar for our app, which is the Jira Workflow Toolbox audit log that also shows you all the automations, the workflow automations that ran in the instance, and show you how it looks like for not everything is green and successful. Build some arrow in there where you can see exactly which workflow was it, which transition was it, what function in that transition was it that was maybe errorful, and then a description of what the problem was. So if something goes wrong, you know exactly where the problem lies and can fix it. So you know what's going on there. And what I want to show off now, so we talked about that the workflow tool like this is perfect to really put your processes and implement your processes in Jira in their entirety. And I bring an example of that with a process that I guess everyone knows because every company has to have it. It's onboarding new people, right? Independent of whatever you do at your company, you will hire new people and you will want to onboard them. And this is a very good example of a process that has a lot of very similar steps that have to be done every time. Where there's a lot of potential for automation, but it's also kind of a little bit of a sensitive process, right? With employee data, so it might be something where some restrictions are helpful. So imagine I want to onboard someone to our company who has a very complicated last name that I just typed before. And our colleague Alana wants to raise this request. This is actually part of a HR service desk, so our HR team has a lot of different other requests that they cover, but onboarding is one of them. And then, of course, we have a lot of information that's required here. When to start, where you're working from. So where are you actually located?
I would like to stay in Hamburg if that's okay.
Yeah, you can start in Hamburg. You're probably like a full-time employee, webinar hero going on here. And you're going to join Alana's team. And to do your job, you probably need like a laptop and a cell phone and stuff like that. And then when we have put all this important information then in, we can start with our start getting you through the onboarding, or getting HR to do all the tasks necessary to get you onboarded. And if we look at this request based on the information that we provided, specifically the name in this case, we automatically created an email address for you with a company email. Oh, that's not good.
Let's fix that real quick.
We automatically created an email based on some of the information that we put in here. This is, for example, one small example of things where we are striving to be as flexible, as powerful as possible, where you can actually do something that you could not do that way with Jira Automation, because Jira Automation does not allow of that much data manipulation. You can access like issue fields with smart values and stuff like that, but you can only do a little bit of rudimentary math. And here we can actually like use text and manipulate data to create new stuff. In this case, use the name.
Actually, a good point you just mentioned for me. One of the great things about automation, Jira Automation, is the ability to use those smart values. Smart values, for those who don't know, are like placeholders that allow you to pull in dynamic data. And you can use them to access and manipulate in a good way almost any issue data from Jira, as far as I know. But I also need to add those information in the log to see if I get the right data and so on and so forth. How would I use those smart values in a workflow?
So we basically have something very similar to smart values, where we allow you to access issue data or a lot of other data in what we call parser expressions. And then you can test the parser expression right in the configuration where we built them, and we will see this later on when we go like in the configuration. And then I can also show you where we go even a little bit further than smart values can go. For example, to build this email out of a name by manipulating the data a little bit. The other stuff that's like going on here, so this is update field basically, is that the group of HR onboarding team has been added as watchers to the issue. So that's something that you can do. And all of them got sent like a custom email with a send email post function, which is also something you can do to like send specific, very specific notifications at specific points of your processes. So these are all actions that are possible with Jira Workflow Toolbox, which are similar but a little bit more flexible and powerful than how you can do it.
So that's actually part of the workflow. I think that's also really important to mention, because you do have this issue created rule or trigger, but that means that the issue first gets created and only then the rule will run, or multiple rules will start with that event, and then they change the issue. With a workflow automation, you actually put in all the information, and after all the information were actually written into the Jira ticket, Jira will then send the issue created event. So you have way more information already in the ticket, and you start fresh, for example. I've seen multiple customer instances where you do these updates in a Jira ticket, and then you send out information and notification, and people get crazy because they will send out like 5 or 6 emails or Slack messages or team messages when a Jira ticket is created. So when you want to avoid that, maybe take a look at your Jira workflow.
Yeah, and then you put it in the workflow before that. Then it's like the very first things that get done. You could also see in our demo that everything we do is documented in a way in a comment, which is another Jira Workflow Toolbox function, post function, add comment here. But this is not really part of the process itself. It's more part of the demo in a way. So we will start getting you onboarded a little bit further by taking this into progress. And when we take it into progress, there actually sometimes it's a little self, sometimes you need to reload it. We're actually creating several tickets here related to the issue for things to be done to basically finish your onboarding. One is the create user and directory. And it should be, that now they're all there. So there are like all these 3 tickets created for you or for the IT team to get a user for you, get a laptop for you, get a cell phone for you. And of course, these are all required for you to actually start working. So you cannot progress. The HR team cannot like progress, close your HR onboarding ticket until all of these tasks are done. This is an example of these conditions that we talked about, those restrictions in your workflows that you can build in based on fields in the issue, or in this case, based on the linked issues. So as long as there are linked issues that are still open and not done, the progressing this ticket is blocked. And this is something that you could use to, for example, require testing to be finished at specific points in your workflow and stuff like that. So if we want to get further here, we have to check out those IT tickets. In this case, the one to create a user in the system. And as we can see here, it was like created with an individual description based on the ticket based on the HR ticket, and also some of the information, specifically the email, got taken over here. And when we go into progress here, we get a last chance to check the email because there's actually some email check done in the background in the next step where the email is definitely required. So this is a chance to check it and change it, and it's actually required in this step. So if you would like take it out and try to do the step without an email, start progressing, then we get an error message. This is a validator in the workflow that in this case checks if the field is filled and gives a custom error message. But you can with the validator basically check lots of different conditions that need to be fulfilled. Basically, the difference between a condition and a validator is that a condition just blocks the transition from being chosen at all in the menu, and a validator is something that when you choose a transition, runs some checks and gives you an error message what the problem is if those checks are not fulfilled. So these are 2 different variations, 2 different flavors.
I personally recommend using validators. Otherwise, people will ask why I don't see this transition, and they don't know. And so with a validator, you see the transition, you see the screen, and then you get actually information why, and then you can react on that. Otherwise, you will get quite a few complaints, maybe.
Yeah, it really makes sense for something where the same people would sometimes be able to do it and sometimes not. Where I have the feeling the conditions make a lot of sense is where you have things that are only be doable for certain people with certain permissions. Yeah. Because then the people that don't have the permission just never see that then they can never be angry that this option is there. But when I try to click it, they get the error message that you don't have the permissions to do this. So that's the case where not having an error message there to tell people what the problem is better sometimes. So what we actually do want to proceed here. So we put the email back in and start the process. And as I mentioned, what's done in the background now is basically a check on the email, whether there already is a user with that email address in the background. And only if this if there already is an email with that user with that email address in the instance, and only if the user check is valid, we can proceed here by creating the user. And this is something that we find here in the actions menu. And this is something that I find really interesting, because when you open this action menu, you have this create automation, manage automation thing down here. So you could imagine that the only thing that you could put in as actions in this menu is automations with manual triggers, right? The manual triggered automation rules. But what you can actually also shows up in this action menu is if you have in your workflow, and we'll take a short look at that, if you have a transition like this, that goes from a status to itself. So the status doesn't actually change with the transition, but you're doing a transition to do stuff. For example, trigger all the automations that you built into your workflow. And these then actually show up in this action menu down here. This from workflow, here is this transition shows up in the action menu instead of in the transition menu, because the issue is not really transitioning anywhere. But what actually gives us here, what power this gives us is, in comparison to a manual automation that would show up here, you can utilize the full power that a workflow transition gives you, right? That is the conditions in validators, where you can restrict this kind of manual automation to specific user groups or require specific fields and stuff like that. But you can also include a transition screen in this transition. So you can basically build a manual automation rule that has like form attached to it that you have to fill out in a way to run this transition. And this is something that really gives you a way to put in, like, ask later in the process for additional input, and not just basically on a create screen, which I like very much, because the manual transition trigger itself is not very flexible. You can restrict it a little bit, but you cannot like ask for additional input or stuff like that. So if we do our transition here, we are triggering actually in the background one of the most powerful functions that we have in the arsenal of the Jira Workflow Toolbox, which is the execute remote action. And what the execute remote action allows you to do is basically tackle any API out there, and contact it and get a response back and do stuff there. In this case, the API that we like connect to with our execute remote action is the Jira user API. So we actually created a user or invited the user with this email address to our showroom instance right now, which we can see here because we got the API response back. And if I reload the issue, we also can like extract information from the API response, of course, because this is like a complex JSON thingy. And here we got just the account ID for this newly invited user now. And we could go on and do further stuff with this account ID if we wanted to. So this, of course, shows you this. There's basically limitless potential here, right? We have some templates, especially around the Atlassian ecosystem, for creating Confluence pages or creating new whole Confluence space, or doing stuff in Jira or connecting to other Jira instances like that. But you can use it to connect basically anything that has an API out there. It could be HubSpot, it could be ChatGPT, it could be DeepL to maybe translate service requests that you get in there in languages that you do not actually speak.
That's cool. Yeah.
So the potential is.
And I like the idea to put that into a workflow. So I used to be a process manager once, and automations are cool, but sometimes you don't want to give people too much power, I would say. To edit those things, right? Typically, even in cloud, you have a sandbox environment where you can build your business processes, and then you do the configuration management. There are some apps out there where you can copy the configurations you've done over to your production environment, and then it's already in your workflow, right? So it's not a Jira automation that you just have to transfer and then adapt everything there. So it's tested, and then you have the configuration management, you have it alive, and it's actually protected from too many people doing too many things, actually. So, and I think that's also a good point and a best practice to say, well, maybe let's think about connecting external systems via the workflow when we need it, which is more the workflow process management approach. And automations is actually something that we can build on top, but probably not those critical and even compliance focused transitions, right?
Yeah.
Automation.
Just here with the if you build this integration in the workflow, then only the Jira admins have the access to it, so it's protected from people messing with it too much. And you can also, by building it into the workflow, give the people access to do very specific things without giving them the whole org administration rights, right? So this way you can give them the option to invite users here without actually giving them full access to the user management if you need only that specific permission in your process.
Mm-hmm.
So this is also a good tool here. So your user is done. So we can mark this as done. And then go back to our actual starting HR issue. For simplicity, we just automatically close the other issues as well. But you can imagine how automation would help on those as well. But we're actually not completely done yet. But one thing that I want to mention about how closing these other issues is also one aspect where we try to go a one step further than Jira Automation can do. Because with Jira Automation, you have your branching in your questions in your automation rules, right? But you can only branch once. So from an issue, you can go to the linked issues, or you can go to the subtasks, or you can go to the parent. You can go one step. But in this case, we basically went 2 steps, right? We went from the IT issue to the linked issue, the HR issue, and then to all the other linked issues of that issue. So we went 2 steps, and we could have gone further if we wanted to.
Yeah.
And this is one step of flexibility more, where you can use this in your processes, which is maybe less helpful for linked issues, but where it could be very well applied would be sibling subtasks of the same issue, right? That you can access like this. But you can see we're not quite finally done here. There's one last step that we need to do to be able to get you started here in our onboarding process, and that is another example of the execute remote action, in this case connecting to Trello by creating a Trello board based on a template that will send you through your first 30, 60, 90 days in our company. So here this time directly save the values here, so we can look at this board that created for you via the execute remote action based on the template, so you could get started right away.
Nice.
And this is another example of connecting to outside services here. And this is actually the last step of our little process example. Of course, usually onboarding someone includes a lot more steps, but we wanted to keep it short so that it would fit into the webinar, right? Yeah. I also want to show what it does, but also show you how it's done, and maybe one of the biggest strengths of the Jira Workflow Toolbox, or one of our biggest focus, and that is how intuitive and easy it is to configure. So if we, for example, we won't check every single piece out that I showed you. That would break our time slot a little bit. But I want to show you, for example, the validator that we put in for the email, because this is like an easy starting point. It's the fields required or change validator. When we had the in the IT issue where we required the email for the one step, there actually are native fields required or fields change validators provided by Jira nowadays. They weren't in the past all fields, but like Atlassian is doing steps as well. We're always trying to be one step ahead. But if you look into our validator here, it's easy to basically do it for multiple fields at once. So here we have the email that is required, but it's easy to add any other field to the list and put in one of the also requirements. So we have flexible choice here. You can make the field required in that step. You could also require it to be empty or changed, which, for example, would make sense when moving a ticket or moving a development issue to review. For example, the review should be done by someone else, then the development has been done. So it could require the assignee to be changed there, or it requires something to like stay the same. And you can see that it's just easy to very easy and intuitive and straightforward to work with those simpler functionalities in workflow. And something that we provide in all of the building blocks that we offer, whether it's conditions, validator, post functions, or anything, is this block on the side. In this case, this tells you fields required. So it always tells you where you are at and what you're configuring right now. So it tells you where in the workflow are we actually working right now, where are we adding this to, or where are we configuring this, what are we configuring, links to the documentation in case you've got any questions, and also some examples down here that you can pick and then directly get applied to your current configuration, so you can see something and get started.
That's cool.
And this is something that we have in all the building blocks that we offer. In addition to the fields here, we have the error message that we talked about, where you can just put in whatever error message makes sense for the validator. This is a very simple and straightforward building block.
Is it actually possible right now with Jira Cloud to build your own wiki format-ish styling around that, so that it's not just text, but you actually have like a I don't know, blue box or red box?
Not for the validator error messages, but for example, you could see that in the comments here in the ticket. Here you can use all the normal like styling to make things fat or colorful or whatever.
Okay, that's probably an issue with the Cloud API.
Yeah, that for the validators, the error message right now is not. You cannot like decide that the color should be blue instead of red. That's a red box because it's an error message, and that's it.
Okay.
So that was like the easiest way to get started and see some of these like straightforward functionality. But if we go into the stuff that we do in the actual HR process, we mentioned that we can do something right on creation, right? So we have the post functions here where we did some data manipulation, especially for the email, as an example. And added the watchers, sent out the email, added the comment, and all this. And this is all done directly on issue creation, and you don't have to wait for it a lot. But I wanted to show off the way that we build the email together, because this is data manipulation that is going a little bit beyond of what we could do with Jira automation. And here in the post functions, we see actually two more things that we have for all post functions that really don't make sense for conditions and validators. And this is the option to configure as who the post functions basically acted out. Because in most cases, it makes sense to act it out as the current user, right? But sometimes you might want to act it out as the assignee or as the reporter of an issue, or act it out as a specific, even functional user, if you want to make sure that the user actually has the correct permissions, for example, if it's about creating issues in some other projects where not everyone would have access to that project necessarily.
Yep.
You can use a functional user here. And what you can also build into every post function that you have in the workflows is basically build a small condition on that post function so that it's only run under specific circumstances. So you could have like a list of post functions in your transition, like 5 or 6, but have, the first 2 only run for a specific issue type, or only run for high priority issues, for example. So could make it dependent on specific fields.
Okay.
But you could have transitions where an email is sent out to a specific group of people, but only if it's like a high priority issue where people need to be notified.
I mentioned in the beginning the smart values you have in Jira automations. Is that something which the parser expression here is for?
Yes, this is exactly what the parser expression is for, and that's why I wanted to check out this email configuration here. So basically, what you would have with smart values is something very similar to what we have with parser expressions with our add field button here. You don't always have to use a parser expression. In many cases, you can. There are like some straightforward options, for example, for updating issues. If you just want to copy it from one issue to another, you can use this copy field value from current issue option, or you can, if you just want to pick a specific selection, for example, for a select field, then you can use selected value or clear it. But if you want to do something more complex, you can use a parser expression, which is our basically low-code alternative to smart values. And with smart values, you can pick values of issues, which is what you can do by clicking add field here. So you can, for example, if you want to access the summary, you can get it here either from the issue itself or from its parent, or if you want to get the reporter, you can get the reporter, or that would be the account ID or his email or his full display name to add. And click it, and you get it added into your parser expression. But what we also have, and that's what we're using here with these purple functions, is exactly that, data manipulation functions. And of course, you don't have to know them all by heart, but we have a neat little handbook built directly into the system where all the functions are listed. In this case, we're using the replace all functions to get rid of the white spaces in that case. And for each function that you could be using, there is a small explanation what it does. So the replace function replaces all parts of the string. In that case, we're looking for the white spaces to replace the white space between your first name and your last name with a little dot to put it into the email, right? And then how the function works, what arguments it takes, and some examples that you could copy paste to then use in your part of the expression, and then continue from there. So you don't have to build them by hand, but you basically can use the glossary to help you along there. And then if you're not sure whether what you build is actually correct or not, we have this, our most powerful tool, I think, which is the testing function, which works also right inside while you're building it, where you can basically take the expression that you have and run it against any issue that's in your system. So in this example, you can run it against the HR issue that we were working with and see, okay, in this case, this is the result. Or if there would be any errors that could show up because you built something wrong, then you get your error message down here. So you can iterate fast and build your even more complex functions very fast using the glossary, using the add field option here, and using the test function without having to build something, then having to save it, go out, run something through it, see into the logs, see that something is not quite right, change it, and do this multi-step process again, and get it basically right the first time.
That's actually pretty cool.
Which is, one of the ways we try to make this very powerful and flexible tool very accessible. And as you can see here, where Jira Automation gives some number and daytime functions, I think some basic math, we have ways to work with users, work with lists, convert data types, manipulate texts, as we could see here in the email example. So there's a host of possibility and very powerful stuff in there. The last thing I want to show off is, while this update fields is probably the most used function out of all the post functions that we have, one of the most powerful ones is the create issue function, which is the last thing I want to show off in a way. And of course, you can also create issues with Jira Automation, right? But you can also create one at a time. And if you want to create multiple at a time, or multiple based on a list, for example, or based maybe on a multi-select field, you would have to build like a complex if then else thing, and then create each single issue possibility on its own, which is a hassle, to be fair. And we have this multiple issues functionality built right in our create issue post function here. And it's also in a lot of the areas here, you can use parser expressions to do very flexible configurations. So in this case, for all the 3 issues that were created in our HR example, they were all created by this one function. And in this case, it's just a static list, but you could build it based on a dynamic list, for example, based on the choices of a multi-select field, or as there is one of the examples here on the side that we could go and apply, create a subtask for each component. So sometimes 2 get created, sometimes 5 get created, sometimes none get created. That's all a very dynamic, flexible possibility. And you can also do flexibly which issue type gets created and which project is created. Of course, as always, you have like the straightforward option of just selecting one, but you could also do this based on a parser function and then have it in some kind of dynamic choice based on some issue fields.
Okay.
For example. And further down, the same for the project choice, right? And down here, you can see how the seed text, which is basically the text chosen here from the list, can then be used to dynamically create different summaries or different descriptions. It could be also used to fill in fields differently in these newly created issues. You can, of course, not just fill the summary and description, but also any field you'd like, as long as it's on the create screen for that issue, create issue links, and doing the same options down here as you would have for every other post function from Jira Workflow Toolbox. So this is really one of the examples where just the flexibility of the workflow automation goes quite a step beyond what you could do with Jira Automation, so that you could, in our view, like very confidently model a lot of processes with this tool. And if you're at some point not sure how to do something, or struggling maybe with a parser expression, that's where actually the reason for our high star rating comes in, the biggest reason, which is our awesome support team, because they will not just support you if there's some problem with the app, but also if there's some configuration questions, they will try to help you and get a solution for your problems and your use cases.
Awesome. Thank you very much. We're already 55 minutes in. So I probably think that we'll get a lot of questions about the Trello board template. So I think you need to export that one. That's a good thing. I really like that one. And yeah, just to repeat what we already mentioned. So the Jira workflow is the foundation for building your business processes in Jira. And when, for example, we start using process mining apps and stuff like that, to really find out where are the bottlenecks in my workflow. Then it's probably a good thing to add automations here and there. But when it comes to these automations that you really need every time you execute something, and you want to have that in one place, in one configuration, I think it's good to use Jira workflows and those kind of apps that gives you, for me, possibly more options to configure stuff. So because, automations, you mentioned it. I use the automation smart value documentation quite a lot. Then I get frustrated. Then I go to my colleagues, which are way more intelligent than me. Thank God. And then they help me out. But so this is really quite helpful with the handbook you provide and all the information. So that's pretty cool. I like that.
Great.
There are no further questions. So with that, Barbara, thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
Really enjoyed it. Have a great day. Everyone out there as well, have a great day. Thanks for joining.